July 19th saw the release of Rambo, Last Blood, and as it turns out, hot on the heels of Dave Chappelle's Sticks and Stones, it is yet another production where there is a wide gap between how professional reviewers rate it and how the moviegoing audience rates it. If anything, Rambo cuts even more directly to the heart of the matter than did Sticks and Stones. For the most part, Rambo's negative reviews don't even mention the movie's technical shortcomings. Instead, and this is the scary thing, they are exclusively about criticizing a political message that the reviewers themselves are projecting onto the movie, but which the movie itself doesn't even have. That's bad, and we shall see why. In this editorial, which I feel I should stress means opinion piece, I will first explore why those reviewers who are seeing Trumpian MAGA fantasies in Last Blood just might be seeing things which aren't really there. Then I'll move into why they're seeing things, and finally, how that is bad news not just for us as moviegoers, but ultimately for the corporations behind it themselves. In short, reviewers have all jumped on the bandwagon that Rambo Last Blood is both racist towards Mexicans and misogynist towards women, and worse yet, it's something that panders to the rhetoric of Premier Donald Trump. That this is a movie that MAGA hat-wearing Trump supporters will get a rise out of, since it features Mexican rapists that need killing coming across the border and has Rambo serving as a stand-in for the border wall, which currently is in the process of being built. That narrative, in whole or in part, is what critics have latched onto as the justification for ganging up on the movie, which, to paraphrase one of them, is irresponsible to release in the current year. Why? Because it portrays the bad guys as bad guys? Now that is a new concern. The Rambo movies have always dealt with contemporary issues, sometimes those not given sufficient attention in the mainstream media, such as the Burma conflict in the previous movie. The one chosen for the spotlight this time around are the Mexican cartels. I have no personal experience with the matter, but it doesn't take much research to see that the portrayal of the cartels in the movie is, if anything, watered down compared to their real-life counterparts. I mean, where affronts to humanity are concerned, some of those hombres could hold their own in a game of can you top this with the Islamic State. Things are so bad that the movie wasn't even filmed in Mexico, but in the more run-down parts of Santa Cruz de Tenerife on the Canary Islands. Because there you can film without having to worry about the cast and the crew being kidnapped and or killed by, you guessed it, the cartels. Chosen villain aside, let's get back to the general topic of movies. For the most part, movies only tell one story, and they have to do so in a limited amount of time, and by focusing on a limited set of characters. So they typically focus on the hero of the story and the villains, and depending on the story told, these villains are typically bad. Maybe not from their point of view, but certainly from the hero's point of view, and that tends to be the focal point of the movie. Up until now, that's been fine. Reviewers were always okay that World War II movies didn't spend screen time showing that not all Germans were bad, and that goes for any movie ever portraying the Soviets as bad guys as well. More recently, the reviewers didn't call for John Wick to show that not all Russian immigrants are mobsters, and they likewise didn't call for Liam Neeson's Taken to show that not all Eastern Europeans are human trafficking kidnappers. In those cases, the audience were assumed to be smart enough to figure that out for themselves. If anything, Rambo Last Blood was more sympathetic towards Mexicans than any of those other movies, as it had two Mexicans that helped Rambo rebuild his life, and another two that were instrumental in him making it through his initial encounter with the trafficking cartels. On that note, I'm inclined to believe that if Rambo Last Blood had dealt with Eastern European human traffickers instead of Mexican, this would have been a big non-issue. But it didn't. It shone the light on Mexican cartels, in a time frame when the border to Mexico is something of a hot topic. That then forms the basis for the reviewer narrative that the movie is somehow a Trumpian fantasy. Because let's be clear about this. Mexicans are not the ones offended by this movie. The most critical reviewers are based in the US, and they are the ones most desperate to push the Trump narrative. If you've seen our mini-documentary on the Rambo franchise, you'll know the problem with the narrative being pushed by mainstream reviewers. If you haven't seen it, you definitely should, but I'll repeat the key takeaway for you right here. The completed shooting script for Rambo Last Blood may be little more than a year old, but the main beats of the story itself, with Rambo attempting to free a kidnapped girl from cartel human traffickers, has been in place since 2010. More than that, the core idea came already during the development of the previous Rambo movie back in 2008. In other words, the story seen on screen in Rambo Last Blood was already broken down long before Trump even got the idea of running for president, let alone getting elected. You see, there is no pro-Trump or pro-border wall narrative in the movie, and that whole accusation is frankly ridiculous. The cartels are the villains here, not Mexicans and not immigrants, legal or otherwise. Even so, that is the narrative being pushed, and I happen to think it is because someone calling the shots are so freaked out by Trump being re-elected next year, that anything that could possibly be construed as furthering the narrative of his campaign, policy, or statements must be confronted and destroyed. So we are talking bias here. And on that note, let us get one thing out of the way before we move on. As the more perceptive of you should have realized by now, I am not American. What that means is that where next year's presidential election is concerned, which does factor into this, that is a fight in which I do not have a dog. I'm merely an outside observer to it, from a friendly nation that has significant military contracts with the US in place, so I likely won't be affected too much either way. Furthermore, I'm from the one country on this planet that Bernie Sanders has singled out as one America should be more like, and which President Trump has singled out as wanting more immigrants from. In other words, neither side of the political aisle in the US has a problem with me or mine, and I can find plenty common ground with both. Which is a long-winded way of saying that as far as outside observers go, I'm a largely neutral one, void of any derangement syndrome in either end of the scale. I may have an opinion on this or that topic, of course, but when I do, I mostly keep it to myself. Certainly on this channel, which is all about celebrating genre media and getting behind the scenes of genre productions. Because these are productions we all should love, no matter where in the world we're from, or which parties and colors we otherwise might identify with. In our passions, we are all united, and that's what we focus on here. Partisan politics, which otherwise may tear us apart, we'll leave outside. Unfortunately, those making the movies and those professionally reviewing them don't extend that courtesy to the movie-going audience. Look at these reviews. They're all about Trumpian fantasies and pandering to MAGA hat-wearing Trump supporters. And again, this is over a plot that hails from when Obama was in office. To be clear, some reviews do address the movie's technical shortcomings as well. David Morrell, for instance, the author of the original novel, who incidentally only really liked Rambo 4, and who may be salty because they didn't go with his outline for the fifth movie, is critical of Last Blood both for the attributed political reasons as well as for its technical shortcomings. Mostly though, the reviews boil down to this movie is bad because Orange Man is bad, with no further technical analysis or justification provided. You would expect that from a couple, but from so many. Are they for real? South Park co-creator Matt Stone had some thoughts on that. In a September 12th interview with The Hollywood Reporter, he spoke of cancel culture in general, and the negative reviews Dave Chappelle's Sticks and Stones received in particular. You will recall that just like Rambo Last Blood, that too was trashed by critics, and politics was the stated reason why. About why the audience seemed to enjoy that so much more than the reviews, Matt Stone said, "I feel bad for television critics and cultural critics. They may have laughed like hell at that. And then they went home and they knew what they have to write to keep their job. So when I read TV reviews or cultural reviews, I think of someone in prison writing. I think about somebody writing a hostage note. This is not what they think. This is what they have to do to keep their job in a social media world, so I don't hold it against them. Yeah, well, hate the game, not the player, I guess. But this is a pretty stunning statement nonetheless, because Stone outright admits that failing to give the likes of Rambo Last Blood and Dave Chappelle Sticks and Stones a negative review could very well lead to being fired. This, of course, comes right on the heels of Will and Grace star Deborah Messing demanding the list of Trump donors in Hollywood be made public, so those on it could be blacklisted. Now granted, she got a lot of pushback for that, but it still serves to illustrate how readily some in the entertainment industry will shun their peers for holding the wrong political views, and reviewers have to ensure their reviews are biased in the proper direction, lest they be fired. That is the recipe for creating an echo chamber of groupthink, in which people have to censor themselves. No good can come of that. Even to me as an outside observer, it's pretty clear that over the last few years, the list of films and TV productions that have had intersectional identity politics infused into them has become a long one. These productions end up pushing a political ideology which divides people by ethnicity and gender, and then gives each group its relative human worth by level of assigned victimhood, and which most importantly has zero root in reality or science.
I like science.
On the contrary, that whole cesspool of associated doctrines are all about as anti-scientific as it gets. Even so, this ideology is being pushed hard in Hollywood, and they receive no pushback from the reviewers or media outlets covering the entertainment industry. On the contrary, they're met with thunderous applause, with every production pandering to that narrative being praised, and every production that might be construed as opposing it getting crucified. And as Matt Stone pointed out, this lynching in the media might not even be genuine, as many reviewers may disagree with the review they're forced to write, but their job and income is on the line if they don't succumb to the party line. That's not just how to create an echo chamber, that's also how you create blind spots. That's how the powers that be come to think they're doing great, because everyone around them tells them how virtuous they are. Not only that, the media outlets they read feeds how awesome they are right back to them. In the process though, they'll lose a good chunk of the audience, who will be put off by the ideological message that is being put into their entertainment at the expense of actual entertainment value. That's how something like Star Wars can go from being the biggest entertainment brand on the planet to having the hardcore built-in fans who might have spent decades buying merchandise either turning to despondency or turning on it in just a couple of years. Pandering to this ideology, whether during production or by supporting it in reviews, benefits no one. It does not benefit the audience, who sees their preferred franchises destroyed. In the long run, it also does not benefit the corporations doing it, as they are killing their own cash cows. It may not even benefit those who will do anything to stop a Trump re-election, because what they're doing here is eating their own. Dave Chappelle is no Republican, and neither is Stallone, despite this being a common misconception. He's even a friend of Biden.
You know what I mean?
Did you vote for Trump?
I didn't vote for anybody.
You didn't vote for
No,
anybody? And you don't plan on
I didn't
voting
like anybody. Tell you so.
Do you plan on voting in 2020?
No. And I'm sitting back on this one. You know, I know Joe Biden, great guy. You know what I mean?
Wonder if those lambasting Last Blood for its alleged Trumpian fantasies ever considered that. Or how the obvious political bias shown in some reviews will work out in the long run. I'm not saying Rambo Last Blood is a perfect movie. There's plenty to criticize it for, such as the boneheaded decision to leave the flooding intro sequence out of the movie in the US. What the hell was up with that? That intro both established the key character relationships and thematically set up the movie to come, so what gives? Point is, there are plenty genuine grievances here that the professional reviewers should have focused on, instead of where the movie can be forced onto the socio-political landscape. The only thing professional mainstream reviewers achieve by doing that is hastening their own irrelevance. Do you agree with them that Rambo Last Blood was a Trumpian fantasy? Or do you think it was just an action movie that happened to feature cartels? Let me know that, and your thoughts on the state of the industry and associated media and reviewers in the comments.